this. So Josh, I will probably send this copy to you once this is done. So I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone here. Just real quick, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and start. First of all, good morning, everyone. Hope you are all staying safe and healthy. My name is Sam Fung. I'm the product line manager for Rochester Gauges. I want to thank you for your time again for hopping on. Real quick, what I wanted to do today was several things on the agenda. Was first of all was to go through a Rochester Gauges LLC overview of kind of who we are for those of you who may not be familiar with Rochester. A little bit of product overview, how to order. Finally, I'd like to talk about some products that we are rolling out this fall. And finally, close our time with some question and answer. So just briefly about Rochester Gauges. We were purchased by Gas Equipment Company in 1958 and were brought into our Dallas office where we still are. In 2018, we were purchased by a private equity firm named Renovo Capital. We are ISO 9001 certified. We operate our main facility out of our Dallas facility. We also have manufacturing facilities out in Mexico, Belgium. We have a sales office in China. We specialize in liquid level sensors, switches, and systems. We're a strategic supplier to OEM customers. Some on here you may be familiar with, such as Worthington, Manchester, Trinity, who's now Arcosa. Here's just a quick photo of all our facilities. So real quick, markets serve. I know with GEC, it's mainly focused on propane. However, we serve a diverse markets. Not only do we service the propane industry, but we also service the industrial industry. So some industrial markets being construction, ag, marine, locomotives, refrigeration, lawn and garden, power gen. We also service a small portion of aviation, some of our customers being C.H. Robinson and Cessna. Since we've been acquired by Renovo Capital, we've made some acquisitions back in 2019. The first one was back in, I believe it was April of 2019. We acquired a company called FPI Sensors out of Eagan, Minnesota. They are known for point level switches. And later, towards the end of 2019, in October, we also acquired a sensor company named Foz Mueller, who is out in Warwick in the UK. So let's talk about some products overview and ordering information. So some of the products that we offer that are typical for domestic tanks, typical we have our A900 series, which is a 1-inch normal pipe thread head size, the 6200 4-bolt in a junior and senior, and the 7200, which is 1 1/4 inch NPT series. We also service auto, gas, and motor fuel. Some of the gauges that are typical in those type of tanks are the 6200 4-bolt, the A944-04, and the 6244-04. These are what we call our plastic gauges. A944 being a 1-inch and the 6244 being a 4-bolt. These are typically on our motor fuel tanks. We also do lift truck, RV specialty vehicles. One to the left you see is the 7384-04. That's the plastic forklift gauge. And the 6200 to 4-bolt, we also do those into RV tanks as well. And the 7300, which is a typical forklifts. So I know a lot of times I work with a lot of you, and you have the question of, well, I'm looking for a gauge to replace a domestic tank, a DOT cylinder, forklift, motor fuel, or RV. One question that I always ask is, first of all, is it a replacement gauge? If it is a replacement gauge, and if it is a Rochester gauge, then the first question I would ask is if you could furnish the part number that would be stamped on the side of the gauge head. Here you see two examples of the part numbers being stamped on the 4-bolt and the 1-inch head. Sometimes if you have the replacement gauge in hand, we could do a very crude way of asking of measuring the support and the float. And here on the bottom, you'll see of asking for the support and the float dimensions is where you would just take a ruler, measure the support and the float. We would know the type of gauge based on whether it's a 4-bolt or a 1-inch nominal pipe thread head. And once you give me the S and the F dimensions, then we'll build you exactly the same gauge as those dimensions. So what if it's not a replacement gauge? Then there are additional questions that we would go ahead and ask. First of all, is if there's a tank drawing or a photo that you could provide. In most cases, I know that it's a replacement tank that's out in the field, so a tank drawing is not really feasible to provide. So in that case, I would ask for photos. Some of the most beneficial photos would be the hole in the tank where the gauge is going to mount and where the gauge is going to be mounted on. Second question is going to be, what is the liquid being gauged? Most of the time, I'm assuming it's propane, but sometimes, if it's not propane, that's also good to know because we have different gauges for different types of medium being gauged in the tank. What type of tank is it? Is it a cylindrical? Is it rectangular? And then tank diameter, ID or OD in inches. A lot of this information can be found on the tank nameplate. A lot of times, some of you I know work in gallons, or like a 1,200 gallon, 3,000 gallon tank. That's great, but I typically work in inches diameter. The riser height. This is more critical for top mounts. The riser height being the distance from the tank surface to the face of the gauge mount. This is more critical in top mounted gauges because the goal is to, to size the most accurate gauge, we would want the pivot point where the float swings to be at the tank center line. This is why it's more critical for a top mount. For a side end mount, the gauge is already mounted at the tank center line. Location and type of connection on the tank for the gauge mount. Again, that's good information for us to know where the gauge is going to be mounted. And finally, any baffles or pipes in the tank that could hinder the swing of the float. Obviously, these are mechanical gauges where the float swings up and down. So if there is a dip tube or a baffle that sits, at a certain distance away from the gauge mounting, that would be good. That would be good for us to know. So a quick ordering guide for gauges for domestic tanks, DOTs, forklifts, motor fuels, and RV. A quick rundown of the typical model numbers, the 6200 being a 4-bolt, the 738404, that's a plastic forklift, that's a 3/4 inch normal pipe thread connection, the 8900 being a 1-inch NPT, and the 7200 being a 1¼ inch NPT. The next, so unique part numbers, a lot of times sometimes you'll run into a situation where if we ask for a gauge part number, it will be either a 6281-000000, and you may be wondering what that is or what in the world is that. Back in the old days, we used that as what we called standard construction. It is a one part number fits all type of gauge. We are trying to get away from that, mainly because down the road when we need a replacement, we have a unique part number that's assigned to the gauge, and we can pull up the drawing and know exactly what support and what float dimensions are to the gauge. So a lot of times if we're trying to replace a gauge with a 0000 part number, I'm going to lean towards setting up a unique part number tied to this gauge. So moving on, we also service bulk plant and bulk storage. We have gauges for these applications, most of them being the P6290 series and Eliminator, which is the roto gauge replacement, and the 6300 magneto series. And we also do we also use those same gauges in the bobtails and transports. The magneto being the Rough Rider type, which is for mobile tanks. So, trying to replace an existing magneto gauge. All our magneto gauges will be stamped with serial numbers. So here you see an example where you see one of our serial numbers stamped on the side of a magneto head. Here you see M6342-12-83-105-G13. So breaking that out into pieces, the M6342 tells me it's a Rough Rider gauge with an 8-inch magneto for industrial application. Here the prefix and the model numbers I'll talk about more in detail at a later slide. The -12 tells me it's a -12 trim, which is all parts of 300 stainless steel. 83 is the tank diameter. 105 is the serial number that we use internally, and then the G13 is the date code. So replacing or ordering a magneto or Rough Rider gauge, this is almost the same questions in line of what we would ask in replacing a gauge for a domestic tank or a DOT cylinder. First of all, will be a tank drawing or a photo. Again, you know, it's a lot of these tanks are out in the field, so a photo would probably be more feasible. The type of tank, is this going on a bobtail, transport tank, or a bulk storage tank? Tank diameter, again, ID or OD. This information can be found on the tank nameplate. Head type, semi or hemi. This is good for us to know based on sizing the support length of the gauge. And again, riser height, which is more critical for top-mounted gauges. Distance from tank surface to face of the gauge mount. That way we can size the support appropriately based on the riser height so that the pivot point drops at the tank center line. Location, type of connection of tank for the gauge mount, and any pipes or baffles in the tank that could hinder the swing of the float. So a quick ordering guide for magneto and Rough Rider gauges. A lot of times you'll see it's a prefix in front of a 63 followed by 2 letters and then followed by 000-XX. Now the -11, it's the typical magneto that we supply for most typically for propane applications, as all 300 stainless steel with the exception of a zinc plated counterbalance. The -12 being an all 300 stainless steel, which includes the counterbalance being stainless steel. So the 4 main model part numbers determine what size dial, whether it's a 4-inch or 8-inch, which are the 2 dial sizes that we offer for the magneto gauge. And the model number also tells us not only what dial size, but what type of mount, whether it's a top mount or a side end mount. At the bottom, you'll have prefixes. If it's none, then that means it's an industrial application, which means a non-propane. Typically for gas equipment, it's going to be a C, which is a combination of LP and NH3. And then so, for example, let's say for a bobtail gauge, the correct part number would be a C, which is LP gas NH3, M for mobile service, 6339, which is a 4-inch dial side end mount, -00011. So now I'd like to talk about some new products that we are rolling out this fall. And that is the Magnetel eDial and the eTemp wireless temperature sensor. So the Magnetel eDial is designed to eliminate the guesswork and calculation of temperature compensated tank volume. It is used for transports of bobtails and bulk storage tanks. It provides an automatic temperature compensated tank levels through wireless communication with the wireless temperature sensor. It's got improved accuracy through a digital display of temperature compensated volume, and it removes dial parallax. So you're looking at a digital display of the tank volume as opposed to pointer dial. Several information and features on the E-dial and the safety barrier. For the E-dial, it comes with 24 feet of cable with flying leads that must be connected to the safety barrier to comply with intrinsic safety. Temperature range -40°C to 80°C, IP66 rated, a 4-inch LCD digital gauge indicator, resolution of 0.1%, and it's retrofittable on existing 4-inch, 8-inch magneto and Rough Rider gauges. The safety barrier, which comes with the E-dial, some questions I have is that, you don't have that, yes, we provide the safety barrier. The safety barrier will come with the E-dial, so the safety barrier is not something that you will have to source on your own. It comes pre-installed with 5 foot of cable for battery and power input. It's intrinsically safe electrical design. It's a supply voltage of 12 to 24 VDCs. Max current input 120 milliamps. It's a fused output, and again, it's included with the E-dial. In addition, we also have obtained intrinsically safe certifications for the E-dial and the safety barrier. So we have Class 1 Div 1 Group C and D certification for both the E-dial and the safety barrier. We also have obtained global certification, ATEX CE for to sell to Europe, along with IEZX for global certification. So here's a summary on the magneto E-dial features. It shows a bar graph showing non-compensated tank volume, dual programmable alarm indicators that the user can set up using the app, which I will discuss here shortly. Again, 24 feet of cable to connect to the safety barrier, digital display of temperature compensated volume, tank content specific gravity and temperature that the user can input on the app, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. So the wireless temperature sensor, which is what we call the E-temp, it's intended to be fitted on the existing half-inch NPT thermal well on tank to replace the existing thermometer. Provides a Bluetooth communication of tank content temperature to the E-dial, which allows the E-dial to display temperature compensated volume. It's battery powered, Bluetooth enabled, operation life of about 5 years, a 1-minute update ratio to the E-dial, rated to the same temperature as the E-dial, so -40°C to 80°C. It's IP66 rated, and we are currently obtaining the same certifications that the E-dial and the safety barrier have obtained, which is Class 1 Div 1 Group C and D, along with ATEX and IECEX. So the Rochester Gauges E-dial app is the app that the user can download, which is available on the Google Play Store and the iTunes app. User can use this app to set up the E-dial once it's installed on the gauge and powered up. So the user can set up the E-dial alone or paired with an E-temp temperature sensor to allow continuous automatic temperature compensation liquid levels. So when setting up the E-dial alone, the user can manually input the tank content temperature that they get from the reading from the current thermometer, and once they input that temperature, the E-dial will take that temperature and provide a compensated tank volume. Or the other option would be paired with a temperature sensor, where it provides a continuous temperature compensated volume through Bluetooth communication with the temperature sensor. In addition, the user can select specific gravity of the tank content, set up two independent level alarms, and select the application range, which is a 5 to 95 or a 3 to 97. So pricing availability. So the E-dial with a safety barrier, we are looking at a start of production of mid-September of this year, and the temperature sensor will be followed by October of this year. Talk to your gas equipment distributor about pricing and lead time. And that is all I had. Were there any questions that anyone had? Trying to look at the chat, see if there's any questions.
Sam, hey, this is Steve.
Yes.
Can you hear?
Yes,
Hey,
I can hear you.
on the e-dial, the bar is non-compensated. However, the digital display is compensated.
Yes.
Is there a reason why they don't match up? You know, they could be off a little bit, causing a little confusion. But is there a reason why that bar is not compensated?
So the bar is just a display in the LCD that will correlate to the float swing of the gauge. The digital display can either be non-compensated, which will match the bar graph, or if you decide you want temperature compensated volume to be displayed, then you would either pair that with the temperature sensor, or you enter a temperature of the tank content, and then what the e-dial does, it'll calculate the temperature compensated volume and display that digitally.
Okay.
So you do have the option of showing both digital and bar graph to be the same, which is non-compensated. It's just a digital, you have the option of showing it as compensated or uncompensated. So there's a question from Jeff. Will the e-dial retro to the gauges currently in service? The answer to that is yes. So the e-dial can be retrofitted onto existing 4-inch or 8-inch dials. So what the e-dial will come, with two stand posts, similar to the transmitter, the 6315-12. Where you will remove the existing 4-inch dial and then place the standpipes on the existing brackets that hold the 4-inch dials. And then from those standpipes, you would install the e-dial onto the brackets that will provide the spacing to the bracket. In the case of an 8-inch dial, you would remove the 8-inch dial and the 3 brackets that currently hold that dial, and then you would go ahead and install the 2 4-inch brackets, and then install the standpipes for the e-dial, and install the e-dial. So yes, the e-dial is retrofittable onto the gauges currently in service. We are also looking at offering the e-dial with the magneto gauge as a package also. So in the case the customer wants a new gauge with an e-dial, we could do that too. And it could also be e-dial sold alone, or temperature sensor and e-dial sold differently for a retrofit opportunity. Let's see. Any other questions? If not, I do have a recording of this presentation, and I can also send you a copy of the PowerPoint slide that I just presented. Josh, I guess I'll have you as the contact person. I'll send you both those links, and then feel free to distribute them as you see fit. But if there's no other questions, I guess I will end it here. Wanted to thank you all again for your time, and I hope you are doing well, staying safe and healthy. And here on the PowerPoint slide, you have my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to contact your gas equipment sales rep, or feel free to contact myself.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Multiple people are now exiting.